Hello, my name is Brandon Ballengee. I'm both an artist and a biologist, and for the past over 2 decades, I've been creating art that's inspired from my scientific field research and ecological field research, mostly focusing on the loss of biodiversity and kind of the changes that we are making to ecosystems, we as a species, and the way those are impacting other species. And really, the overarching goal of both my art and science are to learn a little bit more about what's happening at this moment in history and hopefully inspire people to try to take steps towards conservation and thinking through like how every one of our actions or inactions have an impact and how some of our actions can be very positive and actually support life around us and biodiversity all over the world. So I've been studying biology and terrestrial ecosystems, specifically amphibians, for almost 2 decades. Big focus of my primary research, the work that I was doing for many years was focused on amphibians, specifically frogs and toads and what are called anurans. Those are tailless amphibians and the way that they develop in really complex ecosystems. So I was really interested to see how alterations to things like the food chain in freshwater wetlands could impact their development or actually in some cases cause severe deformities. In a very complicated way, what we found is that certain types of parasites and predators can cause supernumeric limb growth or missing limbs in frogs and toads as they start to develop. But that's just a part of the puzzle. It turns out that at least in the agricultural wetlands we were looking at, that in the presence of agrochemicals and agricultural practices such as runoff or eutrophication, where too many nutrients are going into a wetland, it creates a kind of food chain that's often out of balance within those ponds. And as such, you actually get more parasites and certain kinds of predators which can then attack tadpoles, causing these kind of limb abnormalities. But there's still many unanswered questions when it comes to amphibian deformities. But specifically, I was interested in that because all over the world, amphibians have been disappearing. So in my lifetime, we've lost probably about over 40% of them. And so trying to figure out ways that what's causing things like deformities or these declines are really important so that we can learn how to protect them and make sure that they continue to flourish. So that deals a little bit with both terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems. In 2015, my family and I moved from New York City to South Louisiana. And since I moved down to South Louisiana, I'm no longer working as a frog guy, but instead as a fish guy. So working in the fish lab at Louisiana State University as a postdoctoral researcher. And my work is really focused on trying to gather information about endemic fishes in the Gulf of Mexico. Those are fishes that are found nowhere else on the planet as far as we can tell, but just some of those found in the Gulf. So what we know is, or what we think we know, is right now there are about 77 endemic fishes in the Gulf of Mexico that we recognize. Out of those 77, there's an awful lot that we know virtually nothing about, almost more than half of them. And one of the things that we started to look at is since the 2010 oil spill, there are 14 currently that have been unreported in natural history collections. So that was the first wave of the research. And now continuing that research, I'm trying to work with shrimpers and fishermen and members of the public that are so involved with the Gulf of Mexico, that are really like living in the Gulf of Mexico a lot of their lives, to help me try to look for some of those missing fish. So one of the ways that I'm trying to kind of inspire, or at least try to start to get to know shrimpers and fishermen and oyster folks here is through art. So it's the research side, the science side, but I'm also using lots of different artistic strategies to try to engage audiences in public settings. So one of the projects was called Crude Life, which was a whole team project that I was the PI on. And in this case, it dealt with looking for those missing fish from the scientific side, but also creating a portable museum where I was able to commission artists to create this portable natural history museum that traveled around to marinas and festivals and schools and places where fishermen and their families gathered. And also oil field workers gathered and just members of the public. And it was a really great way to get folks to look at some of the very inspirational and very unique diversity in the Gulf of Mexico we have. And through that, it was really a great way to start to talk to people, engage with them, talk about complicated issues like the 2010 oil spill. Since 2010, a lot of my work has dealt with the BP Deepwater Horizon spill. It's, as many of you know, it was one of the largest oil spills in human history, if not the largest, at least occurring at one moment. It's been called the worst environmental disaster in U.S. history. So literally the 200 plus million gallons of oil that was spilled into the Gulf had a tremendous impact on ecosystems in the Gulf, and we're still trying to figure out what those long-term ramifications are almost 10 years out. So a lot of my projects have dealt with that both from the art side and the science side, and one of the larger installations was called Collapse. And this was a large pyramid sculptural installation which involved over 26,000 specimens stacked in these glass jars on glass so that it literally kind of created a sculptural representation of the Gulf food chain, but only a tiny representation. It was over 26,000 specimens representing less than 400 species, which is a tiny little fragment. You imagine Collapse, if you had another like 97 of those, that would be closer to just what we know about the diversity in the Gulf of Mexico. So the underlying goal of that piece, if there is, one was self-expression and working with a team of other science folks, but also a way to speculate what we thought might be happening as a result of this spill, how species might disappear, and what impact on the food chain that might have. But also to show people just a little bit about the complexity of huge environments like the Gulf of Mexico. I mean, there's so much diversity, and there's so much interconnection between all the different species that we're still learning about. So on one hand, I hope that the piece would be a kind of memorial to the organisms that were lost and the human lives that were lost during this spill, but also a way to kind of inspire people to want to learn more about this amazing, our Amazon rainforest in the United States, and how and why this is just such a special part of the world, and why we should be concerned for it and want to protect it. Much of my work has dealt with wanting to inspire people to protect and conserve biodiversity. And I think one of the first stages, and one of the ways that art can really work in a very special way, is just that, to inspire people by giving a visual presence even to an absence of a species can have a powerful impact when somebody's viewing a visual work of art. And then in other strategies, by showing people what's missing or what's there but has been altered by our human activity, I think that's a really key component that art can do. It can really reach us in a way that science can't. It can reach us at a very emotive level and a very interpersonal level. And I think that's one of the first stages to try to inspire change in behaviors for us. So a lot of my work over the years has dealt with changes to marine ecosystems and the world's oceans. And as we know, the oceans are the origin of life on our Earth and the origin of the lineage that brought us here. So they're so rich, and there's so many things that we still are yet to know about them. And there's all these rapid changes that are happening. We know that so many of the fisheries are depleted, but we also know that conservation works. When people are aware of these issues, when there are actually sustainable seafood choices, most folks will choose those choices instead, because I think many people, probably most people, want to make sure that life continues, that we always have these species for future generations to experience, to find joy in them. So I think one of the big keys is just allowing people to become aware of this and figuring out creative strategies maybe that combine art and science to really reach people with a conservation message. So, as we're here listening to this documentary, um, all over the world, rapid changes are taking place. Be these loss of biodiversity, be these changes to terrestrial or aquatic ecosystems, alterations that we're making, um, but also the fact that we're sculpting the globe's climate and how that's not only impacting ourselves already, but how that's impacting other species like insects and arthropods and amphibians. And so I think it's we're at a really interesting moment in human history where we know that we're causing all of these widespread changes and all these like tremendous environmental issues are facing us now, and they're complicated. They're not science problems, they're not art problems, they're human issues. But the good side to that is because we are so remarkably creative and because we are so much more aware of what's happening around us now, I think we really have the ability to start to solve some of these complicated problems. And a lot of that deals with that first level again of just becoming aware of them, becoming inspired and empowered to make changes in our daily lives. Every time we go to the grocery store, we vote. Anytime we're purchasing anything, we're making a decision, whether consciously or otherwise, to support certain types of behaviors. How we transport ourselves different places, what we're doing in our backyard or on our rooftop or not doing. All of those actions or inactions can have an impact, and they can be really positive. One of the things that I've seen growing all over the world at this point, really, especially here in the United States, is this kind of push towards creating habitats in your own backyard. And really, that's about kind of often inaction. It's not just mowing and spraying everything to create this kind of golf course in your backyard. It's acknowledging that that outdoor habitat can benefit other species like avians and birds and mammals and especially insects. So just things like that, becoming aware that even through a small behavior you can make a contribution to biodiversity, I think is so important. As we're recording this documentary, the Amazon rainforest is on fire. In Southeast Asia, the forests there are burning. We know that most of the global fisheries are in decline. Some are on the verge of major collapse. There are all these pressing environmental huge issues that are happening right now. Our endangered species just got chopped. However, we have to stay focused on trying to do what we can. We can and we will save lots of different species and in turn hopefully save ourselves in the process. Life wants to persist if we let it. It will thrive if we nurture it and just allow space for other species to exist too. And the more that we learn and the more we become inspired to be aware and learn about these different species and try to protect them, the more that we're going to have a positive impact on the future. So I always say, no matter how negative things look around us, focus on what you can do every day to try to make something helpful in your backyard or in your community or around the world in a different way. All of those little actions have an impact and they can be incredibly positive. One example of a positive project that we're working on is the Atelier de la Nature. And what that is a little over 3 years ago, we bought agricultural land in South Louisiana. Here it was soy fields. So what we did is my wife and our 2 little children, we bought this land, we took out the soy, and we've been returning it to a natural habitat to create an eco-campus and a nature reserve. So here what we've done is we've planted prairie grasses, which then help create habitat for birds and reptiles and amphibians, but also importantly help to sequester carbon. And then we planted over 1,000 baby trees, and we're putting in a large wood duck lake at the back to create habitat for native turtles and fishes. Then we have these community outreach events and festivals where we invite all kinds of people to come in and share what they know about the nature and biodiversity of this area, but also to celebrate the way that the culture is so unique here in South Louisiana with music and food, and how that's directly tied into the landscape and the ecosystems. So my